It wasn't just the play calling. It wasn't just the offensive line. It wasn't just Mahomes. All three of them played a pretty heavy role in this. But Mahomes himself had a pretty subpar game. You're not going to beat the Bills like that. The more frustrating thing for me was on the offensive side of the ball. You trade for Breece Hall, that very likely changes. They still control their own destiny in the AFC West right now. You lose against the Broncos, you no longer do. I feel pretty good about them against the Broncos, even though the Broncos have a great defense. Missing Surtain changes everything about their defense, but their pass rush is so good that it helps it not matter as much. They have to win it. If you lose to the Broncos, you are in literally the worst position you've ever been in during the Patrick Mahomes era, and you're staring at missing the playoffs in the face.
So today's conversation with Seth Kaiser of KCSN was a brutally honest one about the state of the Chiefs after the Bills loss, the weakness Buffalo exploited, and now that KC did nothing to address said weaknesses before the deadline, it's time to tighten up and get ready for the most important game of the season, bar none, against the Denver Broncos, because if the Chiefs lose, they are in some serious trouble. So let's get into it. But first, how about those? All right, Seth, it's the bye week, but there's still a lot to talk about. The trade deadline came and went. The Chiefs made no moves. I wasn't confident that they would be able to make moves, but I was hopeful that they would try. I think they did try. They offered a fourth reportedly for Breece Hall of the New York Jets. I think they sniffed around for defensive line. I would assume they couldn't find what they really wanted along D-line, so if you're not able to address a problem on defense, you tried to look to address a problem on offense, and you couldn't make either work. What were your thoughts about that and the Chiefs not making any moves? And then we'll kind of dive into the Bills game and look ahead to the Broncos game as well.
I was pretty disappointed. Like, I think a lot of people were. There's valid reasons why you might not want to give up a third rounder for a running back that you're going to have to extend as well. I get that. I get cap stuff. I get, they don't have a ton of picks because even when they trade for picks, then they tend to trade up to get guys that they really like. And, you can talk about the wisdom of that and all that. I do get it. It was frustrating for me because there are such clear areas of needed improvement. In terms of defensive line, a few days before the trade deadline when Phillips got traded, I really cooled on the idea of an edge rusher because of all the guys that might be available. There weren't a lot of guys that I would have viewed as genuine needle movers. And to me, the problem the Chiefs have is they have rotational caliber guys in the lineup already. That's how Omenahu's playing this year, unfortunately. He's had flashes, but it just hasn't been as good. Mike Dana hasn't played as well this year as I know they were hoping when they signed him to that extension a couple years back. So, they've got those two guys in the rotation. Ashton Gelati arguably is playing as well as both of them and is slowly trending upwards, which is great to see. So you've got guys that are rotational but not difference makers. You've got George Karlaftis, who's playing better than he was last year, is generating a few more quick pressures, a few more one-on-one wins. Still doesn't do it at a, he's your best pass rusher level. And even if he's your second best pass rusher, you really want your first best to be a superstar then. And again, that sounds like a knock on Karlaftis. There's a reason the Chiefs were able to lock him up early and lock him up for such a reasonable deal compared to the top end guys. He's a good player, not a great one. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm so glad he's locked in as a Chief. The thing is, they've got rotational guys. Yeah. So to me, trading for another guy that is a non-needle mover, another purely complimentary guy, to me doesn't make sense. The juice isn't worth the squeeze there. And that's why I think the more frustrating thing for me was on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, falling in love with any one running back is kind of a bad idea. But to be perfectly blunt, when you saw the difference in how the Bills were willing and able to rely on their run game with Cook, who's an excellent running back, and the way the Chiefs weren't willing to do so, although they were running the ball really well. So that might have been more a decision than anything else. But part of that decision is based on the fact that Andy Reid knows that Kareem Hunt is not James Cook. If you give Kareem Hunt 20 carries in a game, it's been proven time and time again that he'll be okay, but it's not going to continue with success the way it does when it's a changeup. You trade for Breece Hall, that very likely changes. And that was a frustration source for me because, we're willing to give a fourth, but not a third. Positional bargaining bothers me sometimes where, to me, given what a crapshoot the draft is, if someone's worth a fourth round pick, they're probably worth a third round pick. Now, you can argue that on a slippery slope, then then they're worth a second round too, and then they're worth a first round too by that same logic. Yeah, I get it. But using practical common sense, that's not what I'm saying. It's really a matter of if you're willing to give up a fourth rounder, and if that means that this is a guy that you're probably not just renting. If you're willing to give up a fourth rounder, you're probably going to sign him to an extension too. And so then he probably is worth a third rounder. I would have liked to see them do that because it's such an easy and obvious upgrade. in a place that could genuinely help. They're a really good run blocking team at this point when everyone's healthy and there. They had a few growing pains early on in the season, but I mean, the interior especially is doing work in the run game, and a guy like Breece Hall can really change. One of the looks that they're really struggling with right now is two-man, where you've got two safeties high, they're playing man coverage across the board. They're struggling with that, and one of the best things you can do to beat that is just run the ball for 5 or 6 yards of carry and drag that safety down. And sometimes football really is that simple, and people will say, well, Andy Reid will never do that. To some extent, I get what you're saying, but I also would tell people to go and look at how often they ran the ball when you had Jamal Charles. Now, Breece Hall is not Jamal Charles. No one is. But look at how often they ran the ball with Kareem Hunt in 2017 and early 2018. I mean, even last year when the passing game was struggling times, they had multiple games where Kareem Hunt's running the ball 20 plus times. It kind of goes into this idea of standing pat, is this repeated idea that, well, if we just make a few adjustments, that's all we really need to do. And the word hubris or arrogance is one that I've tossed around a lot lately in terms of they really seem like they think they can just flip a switch. And maybe they can. And maybe after the bye week, they beat the Broncos and either play the Colts really well or beat them. Because the Broncos game is the big one, right? You can go 1-1 in those two games if you beat the Broncos. If you lose to the Broncos, you kiss the division goodbye. And I know we'll talk about that. But maybe they come out and it really is they can flip the switch. But in 3 of their 4 losses this year, they have kind of dinked around for a lot of the game and then tried to flip the switch, and it was too little too late. And so when you start to see things, it's easy when you think you're seeing something to start identifying it everywhere, but it's hard not to see hubris in that decision at the deadline.
Yeah, that's why I was a little confused by the Chiefs being willing to offer a 4th but not a 3rd for Breece Hall, because, well, if you're going to give something up like that, are you willing to negotiate a long-term deal with a half-year rental anyway? It seems like, based on the state of the running back room and nobody under contract after this year other than Brashard Smith, you would probably be willing to, but I don't know. The Chiefs have never, or not never, in the Mahomes era, have been rather reluctant or felt the need to not invest monetarily into the running back room. You're signing these one-off deals or trying to get away with late-round draft picks. And I respect what they did in the draft last year. Josh Simmons, obviously he should be back for this Broncos game. It'll be a big deal. But you invested heavily in the trenches after getting blown out in the Super Bowl because you got bullied in the trenches. So you went Simmons, you went Omar Norman-Lott, you went Gelati. I think those were your first 3 picks. So I get it. But you're right. The needle mover to me would have been Breece Hall, and it wouldn't have been close. I think you can always say hindsight's 20/20, and you'll never know now. But that would have been worth a 3rd-round pick for another Super Bowl win in my eyes. Now, Veach and them, they have their own reasoning, and maybe there was some other stuff behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And I will address this real quick. I know a lot of people were frustrated about them not making a move and saying, well, they gave up a 3rd for Tony. Why would... Tony had 2.5 years left on his rookie deal, the 5th-year option. They had 2 3rd-round picks and 10 draft picks the next year. So it's not exactly the same situation, but I was hoping they would get Breece Hall just because I've been pounding the table for a more dynamic running back that can do 2 things or multiple things at a high level, run the ball or catch passes out of the backfield. And you are extremely limited right now because Pacheco is 0 asset, no offense, in the pass game. And then Brashard Smith is mainly your asset in the pass game, not so much between the tackles and stuff like that right now. And hopefully Pacheco comes back looking strong after the MCL, but then Brashard Smith maybe just gets an increase of a workload, but it doesn't seem like they're super willing to do that with him yet. And to some degree, I get it. He has 1 year of experience at the position in college, but yeah, the running back room, I think, just is what it is. And the Chiefs didn't lose to the Bills. I don't know if we would be as alarmed.
Yeah, let's say Thornton comes down with that ball in the end zone. Let's say he pulls that down. Chiefs go for 2. I think they probably would have gone for 2, and they win. Despite getting outplayed, I think you are dead on. We tend to be a slave to the most recent moment, which is why heading into the Bills game, the Chiefs were number 1 on a lot of power rankings. Yeah. Because people were watching them just blow teams out. And that includes, because everyone's like, oh, they haven't played anyone. The Lions are a good football team. I think you're dead on with that, for sure.
Well, and I think it didn't help that you saw Buffalo kind of do what they wanted because of the threat of James Cook, all the under center and how well Josh Allen can execute off a play action. I mean, the line holds, yes, but the Chiefs are so afraid of James Cook that they're over by, like Brian Cook, at least on 2 plays from what I saw on the film, he overbit on play action that opened up something down the field for the Bills. Yes. Meanwhile, flip sides, the Bills didn't even match sometimes when the Chiefs had 2 tight ends out there. They kept an extra DB out there because there's an aspect of the receiving threat of Kelsey for sure. But then it's like, well, Kareem Hunt's not gonna make us pay with an explosive run, right? So maybe they would have played a little different if Pacheco was out there, because you at least have to account for his speed, where you don't really with Kareem Hunt. So I think that was part of the frustration for sure of Chiefs fans. It's like, well, look at the Bills with James Cook. Look at Lamar with Derrick Henry. Look at Baker Mayfield with Irving and Rachaad White. Like, look at some of these teams and what they're able to do when they have a run game that you have to respect. And just right now, I don't feel like the Chiefs have a respectable run game. Now, if you rewind before the Bills game, we weren't complaining as much about the running back room because Pacheco was playing a little bit better, and then you're averaging 30 points a game as it is. So I think the return of Simmons helps. But what was going on in the Bills game, Seth? Because Mahomes was pressured 20 times. 2 of them were pressures under 2.5 seconds. The rest of those pressures were after 2.5 seconds, and Mahomes' time to throw was right around top 3 fastest times to throw in the NFL heading into this game, like 2.59 seconds. So when you dug into the film, what were you seeing based on Mahomes holding onto the ball for so long? How much of that was coaching? Like, what was kind of going on there in your opinion? And before I get to Seth's answer here, it's a good one. I did want to first share 3 of my favorite picks from this weekend's games, thanks to the sponsor of today's video, Underdog, the best and easiest place to play fantasy sports. This one is a touchdown-happy 3-legger starting with Jonathan Taylor, who's coming off of a down week in which he didn't score, but the Colts had 6 turnovers, and prior to that, he's had at least 1 touchdown in the past 4 games. So I expect JT to get back on track against ATL this week, and going to take his higher on half of a rushing or receiving touchdown. Then Drake May has tossed at least 2 touchdowns in 4 straight games, and he's done that in 7 out of their 9 matchups this year. So that's an easy higher for me on this one for 1.5 passing touchdowns. Same goes for Matt Stafford. I'm taking the higher on his 1.5 passing touchdowns because he's hit that in 6 out of 8 games so far, and this man has thrown 9 touchdowns the past 2 weeks combined. And if these 3 picks hit, you can win up to 3.02x on your money. So go ahead and tail by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment down below. You can also make your own picks by choosing higher or lower on your favorite player's stats for a chance to win up to 1,000x on your money. And any new signup that uses my code HBTC can play just $5 and get $100 in bonus funds plus a gimme pick in the lobby. What were you seeing based on Mahomes holding onto the ball for so long? How much of that was coaching? Like, what was kind of going on there in your opinion?
It wasn't just the play calling. It wasn't just the offensive line. It wasn't just Mahomes. All 3 of them played a pretty heavy role in this. The Chiefs, with the way they are currently calling up plays, don't have a lot of answers for man coverage in terms of the routes that they call, other than pick type plays and curated plays designed to get one guy open. And that's fine when it works. But if that's your go-to, it can really lead to problems if a team plays it well. And then a lot of their zone beating stuff where they really ask their guys to try to kind of find open space. That's why you're going to find some plays where you look and there's like 4 guys running routes and they're spread up and like every one of them runs what looks like just like a curl against man. And you're like, and literally no one's open. That was part of it. The Bills did a good job, I think, disguising their coverages and calling up stuff that does a good job against Andy's kind of zone beating stuff. There were a few too many plays that I viewed as kind of one shot plays to where they're designed to get one guy open, especially on 3rd downs. There were a couple of those. You know, one was on 3rd and 12, I think their 2nd or 3rd drive of the game. I can't remember what it was, but you've got, 3rd and 12 and they're dialing up a pick play to Worthy who's going out to the right side at like 6 or 7 yards. Like, that's not a winning play. And maybe that was because they already saw that the offensive line was going to struggle. And this is where you end up in the perfect storm, right? Because they did try to dial up some stuff with long developing routes, and then the line wouldn't hold up. And that was problematic as well.
And then when the line did hold, I saw at least 2 or 3 plays where Mahomes kind of just bailed in a clean pocket. And had he stayed, there was one play in particular, Worthy was open left side, had he stayed, but Mahomes bailed right. And I think Simmons returning will help establish a little bit more trust back over there in theory, because Jalen Moore did struggle. I don't think Trey Smith was healthy. He struggled.
Right.
And then Jawan Taylor had a tough game and then obviously left at the beginning of the fourth quarter. And you had Wanye Morris, and he, one bad loss for sure. That third down, double coverage, interception. Mahomes threw up a prayer that maybe could have went to Rice, but I saw or read somewhere most of the Chiefs' third downs, the majority of them were 7 or more yards on third down.
Right.
So you're doing very little on first and second down.
And that's where you can talk about the run game to an extent. So the play you're talking about where he had Worthy on the left side, that was the first drive of the third quarter. It's 3rd and 7. And what you end up having happen there, I would say even worse than Worthy, because Worthy's was a little longer developing. It wasn't an incredible route, but he did win. He's got Brown basically traveling up the seam, essentially, even though he's not right on the seam, but it's kind of the middle of the field, in what would be a zone beating look. And you see Brown looking over kind of the wrong shoulder where the coverage is to his left, but he's really got tons of open space to his right. Now, Brown could have done a better job than this, but Mahomes could have put that on him. And had he just done that in rhythm, Brown's open. And then he also could have held it and he had Worthy to the left. And if he really wanted to, Kelsey's going across the field. He can put that in front of him. Now, the Kelsey, I don't think is a great option. He was pretty well covered. Brown, I think that ball needs to come out in a rhythm. And instead, he bailed right. And the Bills had an awesome, and the other guys get paid too. The Bills had an awesome game plan for Mahomes not beating them with his legs. They were rushing the passer pretty aggressively, but reason so many of their pressures were delayed is because they were waiting. In some ways, they were really careful about staying in their rush lanes, and they were pursuing not necessarily him in the pocket, but where he goes. And Mahomes, I charted him with 3 happy feet snaps, which is for him, it's about double what you normally see, triple on a good year. I saw 3 missed shots. One of them was on this play. So that 3rd and 7 was kind of telling to where there was no reason to bail out of that pocket. He had plenty of time to sit and survey. And then there were moments where he was just hesitating a little bit. Like the very first drive, and I actually thought that this was only after the offense had kind of failed him, but the very first drive of the game, that 3rd and 7 where he missed Rice to the right side, he hesitates for a second. That ball's got to come out immediately. Rice wins on that route. The ball doesn't come out immediately, and so it has to come out a little high and a little hot, incomplete. He just had a couple of tough missed shots where he was bailing. And that intentional grounding, for example, sure, the intentional grounding shouldn't have gotten called, right? That was a drive killer. That's really a bummer. But the thing that's really unfortunate to me, he didn't need to climb the pocket the way that he did. He has Noah Gray, I think it is, open in the middle of the field. He can hit him there. And instead, and he also further down the field, Rashee Rice is coming open underneath the safety. Now you've got a defender that's kind of in the lane there, so he'd really have to layer that throw to Rice. But that's a throw we've seen him hit multiple times. And I think it's 2nd down. You've got the ability to hit Gray. He might get a first, or you're in 3rd and short. And then instead, you climb. It doesn't help because they're ready for you climbing, and it makes it exponentially worse. And then you throw, the ball gets tipped, doesn't get whatever. But the throw he was going to make wasn't nearly as open as the ones he could have made. Mahomes had his problems this game. And so in terms of against the Bills, yes, I'm frustrated by Andy Reid's play calling. It looked way too similar to stuff we've seen against the Bills in the past, except some of the kind of unique protection stuff they did in the second half. They did a few things that were pretty cool there. But Mahomes himself had, especially for him, a pretty subpar game. And when those two things happen at once, the fact that they were in it required some miracle plays.
4th and 17. Crazy.
Yeah, that 4th and 17 was sick.
It was awesome.
Even at the end of the first half, great play design and great route for Hollywood Brown to run. And he does a good job. But this is another example where, and it was way down the field, and I get all that. But if Mahomes puts another yard on that, it's a touchdown. I mean, Brown had to basically stop. Now, should Brown have turned his whole body around to catch it? No. But he basically had to come to almost a full stop. Now, was it 50 yards in the air, give or take? Yep. And that's tough. But that's still one where, again, it's just being a little bit better would have helped. So it really was a Mahomes thing and an Andy thing. And then this was the game by far the most. We're having Jalen Moore instead of Josh Simmons while Trey Smith was struggling, while Jawan Taylor was struggling. If you have Simmons in there, because Moore struggles more against power-based players, Moore's done a really great job. He's also shown why he's considered an above average left tackle, a little above average, a guy who can start for a lot of teams, but not what Simmons has become before Simmons' absence, and I think him being back will really help. It was really the offensive line got beat soundly. Andy Reid did not have a good game plan, and Patrick Mahomes played at a subpar level. That you're not going to beat the Bills like that.
That's what I was seeing too when I dove into the film. People are like, well, what is the main reason? I was like, it felt like a mixed bag. It wasn't just one thing. Like the initial thought was, oh, the O-line was just terrible all game. Well, when most of the pressures come after 2.5 seconds, that wasn't always the case, even though I think Mahomes just kind of started losing trust on that left side when you can't see it. That's the problem, and that's what the stability that Josh Simmons brings. Then there was a couple RPOs where I know we kind of roast Andy Reid sometimes for not calling run plays, but I mean, an RPO is literally a run-pass option, and Mahomes has the ability to hand it off if he wants. I saw the RPO, there was the quick throw to Worthy that lost 2 yards. Had you handed that off to Kareem, that might have went for some yards there. And then the inverse at the 1 yard line, I think you probably should have thrown that to Worthy on first down. They had the numbers over there to potentially score. It's tough to know. Hindsight's 20/20, and Mahomes is reacting in real time. You have like a half second to make the decision. So easier said than done for us watching the film afterwards in slow-mo. But I am encouraged to hear you kind of say, hey, there's several reasons here, but Mahomes did have kind of a bad off game for his standards. And the reason why I am a little encouraged by that is just because how often does he have bad games? I mean, more times than not, he's having good games. So you lose to the Bills by 7. They're a good team. I've had people say they're not a good team. They had multiple defenders missing on defense. Well, if the Chiefs would have won, we wouldn't have said, oh, that was a bad team. If you beat the Bills in the playoffs like last year when they had injuries on defense, I didn't hear a single Chiefs fan say, well, they were a bad team. That doesn't count. Or, you know what I mean? Right. So it's like, no, they get paid. They make plays. Cole Bishop, he had the best game I've ever seen him. Yeah. It wasn't even close. He just was lights out. Good film study. The Bills got it done once again. I mean, we could talk about the defense briefly. The problem for me is, Seth, when the Chiefs offense, just the way the team is built right now, if the Chiefs offense isn't going up multiple scores early or just at least leading, forcing opposing teams to press, like the Lions game, they were up multiple scores. The Lions had to kind of abandon the run. And when the Bills are leading all game, they trailed for 3 minutes. They were able to play their game. And obviously, then when they had play action, the Chiefs really struggle.
And that's the thing. When you are allowing that level, that amount of running the ball, because people might look at Josh Allen's stats, and he played really well. Yeah, but they might look at his stats and be like, well, I mean, it wouldn't have helped if they'd passed the ball more because they just would have scored more. One of the reasons they passed the ball so well was because of how well they were running the ball and how the Chiefs just could not, like they when they run at that volume and still run that efficiently, that's really bad. That's really, really rough news. And the Chiefs right now, they kind of sell out to stop the run a little bit early, and you could see the effect that would have. But man, when there were just too many times where the Bills were, in third and short, and that's just no way to live. When they got to third and long, they often had a good play dialed up for it because Spags usually is able to win those scenarios against Allen and Brady. It's those other shot plays where it's run or pass. That's when you saw coverage breakdowns. That's when you saw, everyone's been screaming for Noel Williams. He kind of had a tough game. He had a few times where he was in the wrong spot. And, that happens. He's a rookie. He'll be better. I'm glad to see he's getting playing time because he's played really well overall. Personnel-wise, it was really frustrating to watch the Chiefs continuously get placed at a disadvantage personnel-wise against the pass because the Bills knew if they could keep 2 tight ends on the field, the Chiefs would keep all their linebackers on the field and they could attack the middle of the field or they could attack horizontally and the Chiefs wouldn't have as much speed. I think Jaden Hicks played like 4 snaps.
Yeah, that was weird.
And Hicks has had at times an up and down second year. It hasn't been as good as we've hoped. But that said, he's also made plays when he's on the field. And he's a guy who can play man coverage against tight ends significantly better than Drew Tranquill, who Tranquill has actually had a good year so far this year. He had a couple tough snaps. Kincaid's a tough cover. But I really thought that the Bills were able to schematically get the Chiefs into some disadvantageous situations personnel-wise, and that's discouraging.
And hey, many of you already know this because Seth is a regular here on the channel, but if you're enjoying his content, make sure to subscribe to his Substack where he's doing 2-3 articles a week, and it's really good, in-depth stuff that he communicates in a way any fan can understand, whether you're an X's and O's person or just watch on Sundays. It's basically for everybody in a non-hot take manner, and you could subscribe to his Substack for $12 a year forever. That's 60% off using the link in the description down below.
When they're able to run under center play action for a lot of their drop back type stuff, it's hard to rush the passer effectively that way. There's a reason the best teams have a high rate of play action on first and second down, because it makes it really hard to rush the passer unless you're an awesome pass rushing team. Like, for example, the Broncos that they've got coming up, they rush the passer really well regardless.
So by the time we put this video out, Thursday Night Football will have already happened between the Broncos and the Raiders. But heading into this game, the Broncos have 40 sacks on the year, and the second place team is the Lions, 12 less. Now, on top of that, I think the Broncos haven't even had their bye, which is even crazier. One less game than some of these other teams and 12 more sacks.
That's disgusting.
Yeah.
And Benito's a stud. They really, Allen's a stud. They just really have a lot of genuinely, they can win on one-on-one and they can execute the system really well.
How are you feeling about this Broncos game after the bye week? Josh Simmons is back in the building. He's reportedly trending. The hope is he's going to be on the field starting, which is helpful because if Jawan Taylor, I don't know if you saw the play where he got rolled on, that ankle got rolled on. It was the last play of the third quarter. Mahomes got sacked. Jawan Taylor's ankle got rolled on pretty good. And so I am slightly concerned, but I'm saying all that to say if Simmons can play left, then that would be ideal because you might have more on the right side if Jawan can't go, especially against this pass rush. But how are you kind of feeling? Hopefully Pacheco can play, but if he can't, then that is what it is. You've got to get that MCL right, and it might take a little bit longer than the bye week. But how are you just kind of feeling about the state of the Broncos and the Chiefs and the importance of this matchup coming up after the bye?
They still control their own destiny in the AFC West right now. You lose against the Broncos, you no longer do. No matter what happens, you don't control your own destiny. You beat the Broncos, you control your own destiny, no matter what happens against the Raiders. So that matchup is huge. I feel pretty good about them against the Broncos, even though the Broncos have a great defense. They match up well against the Chiefs overall and have repeatedly. Their defensive coordinator has repeatedly done a great job against Andy. There's a lot of familiarity there. And Andy at times, for as great as they've been against division opponents, that's often been more of a talent thing. Andy at times, good defensive coordinators that know him well, they'll get him sometimes. Now, sometimes he'll get them too. The Broncos scare me in that sense because they generally match up well. Missing Surtain changes everything about their defense because he does so much. But their pass rush is so good that it helps it not matter as much. But losing a guy like Surtain, I mean, he was the defensive player of the year for a reason, but it bumps everyone up a notch, right? So now your CB4, who never saw the field before, is now in the field 60% of the time. And that's what the Chiefs found last year. So there's potential spots there for someone to pick on. I do think that Peyton has drawn up good game plans against Spags before, and Bo Nix runs the ball well, and that's been a problem for the Chiefs this year.
Yep.
I'm feeling probably 65-35 about the game that the Chiefs should win. But for me, it just is like, because of the way they lost the Bills game and because of how familiar it looked with how it looked against the Eagles and against the Chargers, despite how good they looked in between, even in their loss to the Jags, which they looked really good and did extraordinarily dumb stuff. Like that game might haunt them. If you're 6-3 right now instead of 5-4, things are so much less dire standings wise. They have to win it. Yeah. And if they don't, now you're staring at not making the playoffs if you don't win out.
Going 5-5 would be very tough.
If you want to make the playoffs, you probably need to be 11-5, barring some team just collapsing. Now, the one good news, I suppose, is the AFC is just a dumpster fire after the Chiefs and Jags hanging on near the fringe. There's just no one else there. So all they need is the Jags to lose 2 or 3 games in a row, and suddenly that changes a lot in terms of, maybe you can make the playoffs going 10-7 or something like that. This is as bad a position as they've been in at this point in the season since 2021. And the difference is this time, there's not this excuse that teams are playing the Chiefs differently than literally everyone else, which is what was happening in 2021, and Mahomes needed to learn and adapt, and he did. But the other difference is the Chiefs don't play in a garbage conference anymore, or a garbage division. I think even at 5-4, they still had the ability to win the division, even with a kind of meh record. And this year, that's probably not going to cut it because the Broncos have, to their credit, and they've won multiple games they probably shouldn't have, but that's what the Chiefs did last year. So they're in as bad a position as they've been at this point in the year, in the entire Mahomes era. And that means it's time to stop dinking around. It's time to stop planning for the playoffs. You got to make the playoffs.
Yep.
And if you lose to the Broncos, you are in literally the worst position you've ever been in during the Patrick Mahomes era by kind of a large margin. And you're staring at missing the playoffs in the face.
I do think the Chiefs have shown they have the pieces to get it done, to make a run, to get back in the playoffs. Yes. We're not in the situation yet where it's like, season's lost, because heading into the Bills game again, they were kind of flying high on offense, and I think they can right the ship for sure.
If someone were to tell me, like, if I had my option of teams to bet on to win the Super Bowl versus the field, there's like maybe 3 or 4 teams I'd take above the Chiefs still. And that's the problem, right? Because we have seen this film before. So we'll see what happens. I think I've been more doom and gloom than normal, but they do have the offensive personnel with the line healthy. Trey Smith playing hurt against the Bills was really a big part of it. If he's healthy, again, it's kind of a similar thing. Remember when I talked about the idea of one thing going wrong if other things don't? Pass protection works that way. Both your tackles having a bad game is pretty tough.
Yeah.
Both your tackles having a bad game and your right guard having a bad game is a fiasco. So we'll see. They beat the Broncos and look like themselves doing it. Okay. And then we're on to the Colts. But that's the big one. The Broncos game is much more the must win.